I want to welcome everyone. I'll mention a couple of forthcoming events to allow late arrivals to filter in. We have three of our discussion events coming up in the next couple of weeks rather. On May 21st, next Monday at noon, Lilia Shevtsova, Senior Associate at Carnegie Moscow Center, will be speaking on Russia's domestic and foreign policy challenges. On Tuesday, May 29th at noon, Bob Legvold from Columbia will be speaking on trying to put Putin's foreign policy in historical perspective. And on Monday, June 4th, Anatol Levin from the New American Foundation will speak. And they'll all be trying to explain what people like our speaker today are doing. So you who have come here today get to hear it directly without being filtered through analysts. Konstantin Kosachev is, as you all know, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Russian Federation Duma. Here at the Wilson Center, where the director is Lee Hamilton, who was in Congress for 35 years and also chair in the House Foreign Affairs Committee here, we value legislators who engage in shaping foreign policy, and the unspoken rule at the Wilson Center is that parliaments and congresses are always right when it comes to foreign policy.
Good.
So
Good.
Lee will quietly indicate that in his own way from time to time. So we're very glad to have the chairman with us today. He has an impressive biography, as you would expect. He's held several important positions in Russia and the Russian State Duma. He was deputy head of the Secretariat of the Chairman of the Government of the Russian Federation. He was first deputy chairman of the Fatherland United Russia faction in the previous State Duma. And he was also deputy chairman of the Committee on International Affairs at that time. He was reelected and has been serving for the past couple of years as chairman of the Committee on International Relations. Before this, he had a distinguished career in the diplomatic service, and he's received numerous awards for his diplomatic career, awards from the Russian government, the Swedish government, and the Hungarian government. He's a graduate of MGIMO, the Moscow State Institute for International Relations, and he holds a doctorate in law. So I'd like to welcome him.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is it okay if I am sitting? And thank you. Good. Thank you very much for coming, and I do believe that as the bilateral relations between Russia and the United States is not perfectly good right now, we need to have as many discussions of this kind as possible. I am supposed to speak both on our domestic policy as well as foreign policy issues, and I will try to do that. And I will start with our internal development. Russia is facing its parliamentary elections in December and a presidential election in March next year. This is not anything unique happening in our country. The sixth parliamentary election since Russia became independent, the fifth presidential election. And this period of 15 or 16 years while Russia was developing its political system in terms of history is not extremely long, but still many things happened since early 90s. We all remember how Mr. Yeltsin was initially supported by almost 100% of the Russian population at that moment, and how he lost his popularity just 5 or 6 years later, having 2% of support from the Russian population in the beginning of his second presidential campaign in 1996. We all remember that parties participating in different parliamentary elections appeared and in most cases disappeared. We do have such parties as Yabloko, as Liberal Democratic Party, to some extent the Union of Right Forces, which have existed in many years, in several years, but most of political parties which are now the face of the Russian parliament have been established not very many years ago. And to my mind, this is one of the peculiarities of the Russian internal political life right now. The main problem for us is that we still do not have real influential political parties. One party which is a real political party is definitely the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. I do not speak about the figures of support, but I speak about a party having local organizations all over the country, a party having real sincere supporters who believe in ideology, in ideas, and not just earn money or make career on being a party member, and things like that. My party, which is United Russia, tries to become such a real political party. We are just 5 years old, and we do have problems of our own development, but the main thing which differs the coming parliamentary election from the previous ones is that we will at last have at least one political party which not just give promises about what will happen in case this party wins the coming election, but takes or has to take the responsibility of what was happening in the country the previous 4 years. The main burden of our political situation in Russia right now is that most people are unfortunately, very much unfortunately, disappointed in the definition of democracy. Democracy is not considered by the majority of Russians, and I call it a big tragedy for our society, is not considered as a good instrument of solving problems of Russia. We've made an attempt to use democracy as the only instrument of solving the problems of society in the first half of the 90s. The same development was typical for other post-Soviet countries, but what differs Russia from these countries is that in case of Ukraine, in case of Georgia, or I do not know, Kyrgyzstan, they also experienced difficulties of economic and social character in the 90s, but these difficulties were to a great extent compensated by a rising national spirit. We are independent. We may take decisions over our own lives and destiny, and well, this is what makes us happy, to simplify things a little bit. It did not happen in case of Russia, unfortunately. And this spirit, national spirit, does not exist in Russia still. One of the problems is that Russia is still a multi-ethnic society with one nation dominating, but not being the only nation, I mean Russians. And it is very proper, so to say, to be in modern Russia, to be proud of being a Tatar or Chechen or whatsoever. But as soon as you start speaking about I'm proud of being Russian, this is a little bit improper, sounds very much nationalistic, and very many people are afraid of expressing themselves in these terms, and this engine, as I call it, of sober, healthy nationalism in good meaning does not work in modern Russia. And what people think about democracy is just the experiences, bad memories and experiences. From the 90s, salaries not being paid, pensions not being paid, savings disappearing suddenly, and nothing what could compensate these losses. And one of very respectful poll agencies called Remir made a very interesting research last year, asking Russians what is problem number one which concerns people. They could give several answers, and the state of democracy in Russia came on the 18th place, being a matter of concern just for 3% of Russian citizens. They mentioned pensions and salaries and security and terrorism and environment and Chechnya and many other things as matters of greater concern as than the state of democracy in Russia. And I do not believe this is a good situation, but I just mentioned that in order that you would understand that better. And when countries like the United States take their reaction on what is going on inside Russia, the main problem is that this reaction may be a good one, may be an adequate one, but it does not coincide with feelings, emotions, and expectations which exist inside Russia. If you ask a medium average Russian whether he thinks the system which existed in Russia in the 90s was better or worse in comparison with the system existing in Russia today, you will get an obvious answer. I do not know, 70, 80, 90% of Russians would prefer the existing system, not the system which people in the United States and many European countries still admire and recall as a triumph of democracy. So this is a problem which is to be analyzed, and I do not believe that any further attempts to push the standards of democracy which are well accepted and approved here on Russia will work. It still takes time for us Russians to grow up, if you like that. And when we will be ready to accept these standards of democracy as a society, as a civil society, things will definitely go much better for our cooperation in this field as well. But coming back to our domestic development, most political parties, and yes, one more phenomena which exists in Russia still is that most people hate the definition of party activities and party membership since the times of the Soviet Union. It's rather difficult to engage people in politics. According to the polls, approximately 1% of Russians consider themselves as active members of some political parties. 99% would deny that. Most of the existing political parties in Russia are still parties of either one strong personality, good politician, but without any defined political platform, ideology. And most of these parties exist just in big cities and in mass media, not in the Russian society. I travel a lot around the country, and I may tell you absolutely frankly that when I come to some distant village in the center of Russia, I will always find there some signs of presence of the Communist Party, definitely yes, and United Russia, definitely yes, maybe due to the administrative resource, but in any case, I have my sympathy with our liberal parties like Yabloko and the Union of Right Forces, and I wish them success in the coming election, but frankly speaking, I can never find any trace of their activities anywhere but in Russia and maybe St. Petersburg and some other big cities. And this is not enough, to my mind. This situation definitely cannot satisfy us. I mean people who are in charge of constructing the new political system in Russia. And what we have tried to achieve since we became the majority party was to create a political motivation for small and weak political parties to become strong and united and influential. And some of our reforms, which are widely considered here as undemocratic, as a step backwards, are aimed at achieving this goal. And now I mean first raising the threshold to 7%. In the coming election we had 5% threshold, all the previous elections. And I was very unhappy to see how Yabloko and the Union of Right Forces, I would continue to use these two parties as an example, competed each other while being rather close in their ideologies. Unfortunately, we have two strong personalities, Mr. Yavlinsky and Mr. Chubais, who hate each other on a personal basis and cannot cooperate and communicate with each other. The parties still run their own companies, and both parties received 4.5% during the last election and are now outside the Russian State Duma. And I may tell you quite frankly, this is definitely not a result of any campaign from the presidential administration, from the government, from the United Russia Party or anybody else in order to hold them out of the parliament. On the opposite, we are very much interested in having as broad representation of different political views in the parliament as possible. And now we, United Russia, feel us rather uncomfortable because we consider ourselves as a center-right political party, but as we do not have any other political force rightwards, is it the proper words? Rightwards. We have to take that position in our debates as well, which we do not like, but we need to keep the debate balanced, so to say, at the end. And this is why we all the time have to take this more or less liberal position, which is not typical for our party. We consider ourselves as a conservative party, not a liberal one, but we have to do that because we have 4 political factions which stand to the left, so to say, so-called patriotic political parties. So I would be happy to have our liberal parties elected to the next parliament, but for that we need to create a framework which will force them, I'm not afraid of this word, which will force them to start a unification process. And we have already succeeded in that, at least in 1 or 2 cases. I mean the appearance of Fair Russia Party, which is a result of unification of 3 very small and absolutely uninfluential political parties, and Fair Russia is getting stronger. And we have one more unification process going on the left side, so to say. So hopefully we will get a strong social democratic party at the end there on the basis of one or the other political party, or maybe they will get united later on as well. And I hope that the same process will start developing on the right wing of our policy. Same goes for our idea to go over to the proportional system of elections. As you know, now we have a mixed system. One half of the State Duma is elected according to the party lists, including myself, and the other half according to the one-mandate constituencies. And formally, this system may be considered as more democratic, but it is not. And the example of my party confirms it. We received 37% at the last election, 2003, and we have a constitutional majority of almost 70% in the current State Duma, absolutely legally, according to the existing legislation, because many people from these one-mandate constituencies who ran as independent or under flags of other political parties, after being elected, preferred to join to this strong and influential party faction. And I do not believe this is completely legal once again, but I do not believe it is extremely democratic. We do not have a mandate of 2/3 majority. We do not have a mandate of, for example, changing the constitution by our own decision, but we have it now. And not to change the constitution, including the issue of the third term for the president, is just our own decision, our own choice. But in case we would prefer some other decision legally, nobody can stop it, so to say. And I don't think this is a democratic solution. So we have changed that procedure as well. We will have just party lists in the coming election. And my party, hopefully, we count on approximately 45% of support, which will give us our own majority, but simple majority, hopefully 50, 51, I do not know, percent of votes. We will never get the same number of votes, same number of mandates we have now. So this reform is against our party interests, but we have done it because we really believe that we need to have a more democratic system. The same idea of strengthening the role of political parties goes for our reforms on the regional level. I mean two decisions. One is to have a standard of at least 50% of mandates in regional parliaments being elected through party lists, raising the role of the political parties on the regional level. And the second reform is that the party which takes the victory at the regional level receives the right to nominate its own candidate to the governor of the region. This new system, which is called here mostly as a nomination of governors instead of election of governors, is not as simple, so to say. We have introduced at least 2, now 3 keys to this procedure. One is in the hands of the president. Yes, he has the right to nominate his candidate. The second key is in the hands of the winning party on the regional, and they propose their candidate to the president. And the third key is in the regional parliament, which has to approve the nomination. And in case, for example, we have now a Fair Russia, who won for the first time the regional election in Stavropol, the southern region of Stavropol, in March. This year, they have their majority, and they have this right of proposing their candidate for the governor position, and the president may disagree with that nomination, but in any case, he will have to go to the regional parliament for the support, so he has to communicate and to negotiate with the winning party. And so this is not an administrative procedure, it's still a political one, and I do not believe that it should be classified as a step backward in the sense of democratic development of Russia. And I will tell you one more reason for why we have changed the system of election nomination of governors. In Russia, we've had 89 regions. Now some regions come together, so we have 86 regions right now. But in any case, just 12 of them are self-sufficient. They earn more money than they spend. Out of the resting, 75 approximately, regions, more than or almost one half, 35 regions of the Russian Federation, in their regional budget have more, I will try to explain it, it's a little bit complicated, more than 50% of their regional budget comes from the federal budget. We have 3 regions where the share of the federal budget in the regional budget is more than 90%, up to 95%. It is completely unacceptable, but for the governors of these regions, the main task during the last years was to get money from Moscow, to get money from the federal budget. They did not, in order to get support from the people, they were elected, but in order to get people from the people, all they needed was to be efficient enough to have contacts, connections in the capital, and to get money to the regional budget. Look, I'm a good governor for you because I bring money to the region. It would function for the regional interests, of course, but it cannot function in countrywide, so to say. So that's it. And we had no possibility to intervene, to influence, and to make these governors take responsibility for what was going on in the regions. Now we have this responsibility, and I hope that this vertical of power, in the positive sense of this word, will function better. The coming parliamentary election, my prognosis, it's always dangerous to make prognosis, but my prognosis is that we will have at least 4 political parties in the coming State Duma, and they all are represented in the current State Duma. I hope my party will get this 45% of support, which we got during the last 2 cycles of regional elections in March this year and October last year. It was approximately 45%, so we count on the same result. And we count on, once again, on our own majority, simple majority. I do believe that Fair Russia, the party which is led by the Speaker of the Council of Federation, Mr. Mironov, will get stronger by December, and I think they'll get something like 20%. They are extremely populistic, but people like them, and I think that they have good future in Russia. And we will have communists, of course, something around 15% to my mind, and Mr. Zhirinovsky's party, Liberal Democrats, with some 10% of support, which makes all 90%, if I am not wrong. Then we come to an interesting position, because the threshold is 7%, and if a 5th party, the most realistic option is the Union of Right Forces, to my mind, gets over this 7% threshold, then we have just 3% left, once again simplifying things, for further distribution. And in case I am right, and we have the fifth party, then the United Russia will not have its own majority. 45% plus 1, 2, 3 will not make it, which will mean that we will have to create a coalition. The most natural partner for United Russia is fair Russia, of course, and I think that not right now, but maybe the next election cycle or the cycle after the next election cycle, we will get this approximately the same political system you have here in the United States, with two very strong political parties in the middle, not being very much different from each other, but competing with each other on fair grounds. And I like that system, frankly speaking. I think it works for the United States, and I do believe it may work for Russia as well. And several political parties not being influential and more or less disappearing in a period of 10 to 20 years. This is my prognosis, but I wish these political parties good luck, and I may tell you absolutely sincerely that there is no political project of blocking these political parties, of preventing them to become stronger and things like that. Definitely not. We are very much interested in having a multi-party system with I do not know how many, 5, 7, 10 political parties, and I wish them good luck once again. Well, the presidential election coming next is a tricky question, of course, because we still do not know who will run for the presidency. But my feeling about that, I speak sincerely, absolutely sincerely. I'm not very much concerned about that. I would have preferred another development, but I do not believe that we are in a dangerous situation in the sense of the democratic development in Russia. Because what people in Russia supporting Mr. Putin right now is, I do not know, 70 or 80%. What people want right now is continuity. Just that. Since Perestroika started in 1985, we had some big internal conflicts, dramas, earthquakes of different political earthquakes of different kind each third or fourth year. And this period of 7 years of stability, which started with Mr. Putin, is a unique development for modern Russia, which usually I compare our political debates with, for example, your political debates in the following way. Let's imagine a tree. In case of USA, we have a strong, well-growing tree, and debates between Republicans and Democrats is mostly about one single leaf or several leaves being turned this or that way at the end. And it does not matter whether this or that party wins. No drastic changes. The tree continues to grow. We are not in that situation yet. We have a very thin, young растение, plant, yes, thank you, plant, and our politicians still hold it like that and try to bend it this or that way, and the risk is much higher. In case this or that political party wins, the whole plant may be broken or start to develop very strange ways. So we still need time to let this plant to become a tree. then this is what this presidential election about. This is about continuity. This is about another 4 or maybe 8 years of the same stable development, step by step. No big changes for the better, maybe, but not no big failures, no big defeats on the other hand. Of course, our presidential campaign and presidential election will differ from what you are accused, accustomed to see here in the United States. But once again, I do not believe that the difference is extremely dramatic. Sometimes the current situation in Russia is described in Western mass media in worse terminology than during the Soviet time, frankly speaking, and I'm all the time surprised by that, because I do see deficits and problems of our democratic development. But in any case, this development goes to the right direction. We move us away from the former Soviet system, and we do develop a democratic society of our own format and of our own standards, but this is a democratic society. Now about consequences of the coming elections for our foreign policy. The most peculiar thing I find as a professional in the Russian foreign policy is that, strange enough, Russia being or trying to be maybe not a superpower but a world nation, still does not have a real external interests. Strange enough. To my mind, natural external foreign policy interests could be like finding resources, raw materials for developing your industry. This is not the case with Russia, which is fortunately or unfortunately self-sufficient with natural resources. We do not need oil from abroad, we do not need uranium or any other important things. A second possible external interest may be to ensure markets for selling your products, domestic products, like Germany being very interested in selling Mercedes all over the world, and in the United States the same thing with its aircrafts and cars and other things. Unfortunately, this is not either the natural external interest of Russia, because we do not have competitive domestic products to be sold abroad besides oil, gas and some other raw materials. It is not a matter of day-to-day concern for Russians. A possible foreign policy interest could be ensuring your military security by creating military alliances, joining NATO or doing some similar things like Georgia or Ukraine or Baltic states. Again, Russia is self-sufficient in that sense as well, and we do not need military alliances in order to protect ourselves. So, foreign policy for most Russians is a matter of great interest, but this is like to be interested in football or anything else you watch on TV. Look who wins, who loses, but that's it. For me, for example, as a member of the Russian State Duma, it is always rather difficult to get my colleagues, members of the State Duma, to my meetings with foreigners. For most of my colleagues, it's just a waste of time. Protocol things, you have to be there in order to exchange polite phrases. They do not see what they may get out of these contacts, out of the Russian foreign policy. And it reflects an existing attitude to the foreign policy issues in the Russian society. It is rather low in most cases. Bordering areas, maybe Kaliningrad is a different case, of course, and maybe Vladivostok is a different case, and some other Caucasus. But in most regions, foreign policy issues do not play any central role in political debates, and this is not the case with the coming parliamentary as well as the presidential campaign. We will debate on social policy issues, on how we will use our stabilization fund and other important issues, but I am not sure we will at all debate how we will develop our relations with NATO or with the United States, whether we will be more cooperative on Iran or on Kosovo, for example. No, I'm very much unhappy about that as a professional, but I just give you this reflection of what is going on. And that means that no big changes in our foreign policy are to take place whoever wins or whatever party wins the parliamentary or the presidential election. Russia will continue to be concentrated mostly on its internal development in the coming, I do not know, 10 or 15 years. We will try to have good relations with the United States and with our partners mostly in Europe. In the European Union still will be our major partner in the foreign policy issues, but we will be more concentrated, to my mind, on our closest neighbors, CIS countries. As you see, very interesting developments take place right now in our relations with these countries. They become more sober, so to say, more pragmatic, introducing market prices on oil and gas is a perfect confirmation for that. And I hope that we will be able to overcome the existing difficulties in these relations and start to develop our cooperation with these countries on a completely different basis. And I will be ready to give more information about that, but now I would like to interrupt myself and rather answer your questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Why don't we go right to the floor and see if there are any immediate questions? Why don't we go right down here, Markian, and then we'll come to this gentleman.
Hi. Is this on?
Yeah, just speaking to
My name is Molly O'Neill, until recently a diplomat as well. So I wanted to ask you about the really painful crisis that went on with respect to the monument in Estonia, and how would you assess that whole process? I mean, who do you consider to have been to blame, for the aggravation of that problem and the sort of what I see as quite unpleasant consequences in terms of Russia's relationship with Estonia? And I'd also like you to comment upon, if you would please, the implications of that and the sort of, I guess, the kind of ripple effects of that on the EU-Russia summit, which is coming up in Samara. I mean, I understand now that Poland, and certainly Poland, possibly Estonia too, are going to continue to obstruct the possibility of opening these negotiations on a broader agreement between Russia and the EU. And so I'm just interested in understanding how you think Russia can best remedy that situation to put, I presume you want to put this EU relationship on a better footing. So that's my question.
Thank you. Estonia case. I will start at the end of the story. I am very much unhappy about how Russia reacted. On that, blocking the embassy is not a proper way of expressing your reaction. But these were, as far as I could see, sincere emotions of people who gathered there. But, of course, any country has a right to find better places for monuments. It's a sovereign, and Estonia is a sovereign country. But how it all started when the Prime Minister of Estonia, Mr. Ansip, proclaimed the idea of removing this monument as a monument of occupation, did not leave us freedom of maneuver, so to say. This is an extremely sensitive question for Russians. I may tell you that the victory in the Great Patriotic War, along with Gagarin as a first spaceman, are very few occasions for us Russians still to be proud of our modern history. I was speaking about this absence of national spirit for Russians, and this is why it is so important for us, along with other things. I do not speak now about the substance of this situation, about the role of the Soviet Union in the Second World War, but I try to explain for you why it is so important for Russians these days not to compromise on these discussions of our common history. And we do understand that much is still to be said in the discussion about the post-war history, whether it was an occupation or something else. But in any case, this discussion does not have anything in common with the monument, because the monument is about people who were fighting Nazi Germany in Estonia, in other European countries. All by all, the Soviet Union lost 27 million lives during that war, 9 million of which in Eastern Europe. Outside of this, 9 million lives, including people who are buried in this memorial in Tallinn. And this is why we reacted the way we reacted. In case our Estonian neighbors had started that story in a different way, from the very beginning, telling us and everybody else, look, we respect these soldiers and their memories, and all we try to do is to move it to a more proper place, it could have developed in a completely different way. But it has all started like it started, and unfortunately we had no other way to react. I had a discussion on that with Tom Lantas this morning, my counterpart, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, and he has completely the same attitude to that issue, completely 100% coinciding with what I was telling you right now. But that was the choice of Estonia. They made that choice, and now we have a crisis in our relations, and I do not see any prospect for overcoming that crisis in the coming nearest future, frankly speaking. We will not take the initiative of getting out of that crisis.
Okay.
And the second question is about EU-Russia summit in Samara. Yes, we are very much interested in having as good relations with the European Union as possible, but the carrot, so to say, the new negotiation process on a new agreement is not good enough, so to say. We can live with the existing PCA, Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. Yes, we will lose tempo, we will lose time, because the existing agreement is not good enough. It is not about Russia as a market economy, which is already recognized by the European Union. Russia is called in this document to start negotiations on accessing WTO and things like that, so it's not a good agreement any longer, but it exists. It may be prolonged automatically, and the situation is not as the European Union tries to see it. Russia, you have to give up your positions and interests, because otherwise you will not get that agreement. No, this is not the case, and either we will be able to solve our problems with Poland on a bilateral basis, because we have a dispute which is purely of a bilateral character about meat import to Russia. I will give you just two small details. Last year, once, we discovered a shipment of meat from Poland, which was declared as whale meat, but was buffalo meat from India. Buffalo meat from India. And the second case, which happened just 1 month ago, our experts went to Poland in order to control the warehouses, and they discovered a prepared shipment of meat for Russia, which was frozen in 1993. And the idea was to replace this label with some other certificates, and of course it would look nice, but they discovered that meat frozen 19. We do not want to eat that meat, frankly speaking. So the problem does exist. It does exist. We don't have any problems with meat which is produced in Poland, frankly speaking. We have problem with meat which is exported through Poland to Russia, imported. And we will continue to protect our market.
Okay. Officially, we're out of time. I'm going to extend for 15 minutes.
Yes, and I will be short in my answer.
Okay, and what I want to try to do is, we have far too many questions on the floor. I'm going to try to collect some questions as well.
Yes.
So this gentleman is next, then Ambassador Hill.
My name is Brian Beery. I'm a reporter for Europolitics. Just wanted to ask your view on the whole missile defense shield question. I mean, we've just heard comments from President Putin saying various things, but what's the general feeling among Russians about the whole issue?
Mm-hmm. And maybe if we can get this question.
Okay. Yes, William Hill, now at Georgetown University, but we've met in the context of the OSCE a couple of times. You stated that Russia is still in the process of defining its foreign policy interests, that there's a widespread perception among many analysts in the West that there's a Russian interest in forcing neighboring countries back into the Russian orbit by use of either pressure with energy or economics, such as cutoffs to Belarus or Ukraine of deliveries of gas, embargoes on wine, mineral water, vegetables and meat from Georgia and Moldova. I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about the justice or injustice of such a perception, and you know, how this issue could be at least reduced as an impediment to building better East-West relations. Thank you.
Okay. These are big issues, so why don't you go ahead?
Yes, anti-missile systems. You know, we have our own military experts. They make their own analysis, and they give us 100% answer that these systems in Poland and interceptors in Poland and radar in Czechia do not solve the problem of Iran. Iran does not have missiles which may reach Europe, not to speak about the United States. Missiles which Iran and other countries in the region have is of the basic model is called Scud, and they may be, so to say, modified, but according to our expertise, the highest possible range for these missiles may be 3,500 kilometers, not more. It is technically impossible. You need other technical solutions in order to get other types of missiles, and you cannot do it without being discovered, so to say. There are no signs of Iran developing such missiles, and we may speak about nuclear warheads, but they do not have carriers. Still, this system can be used against Russia. Of course, we are not afraid of 10 interceptors, but if we look at this situation as a consequence of steps, we get questions, and we need to get answers on these questions. Before Mr. Putin delivered his famous speech in Munich, we could not reach our American partners and get any answers from them. This dialogue, well enough, it has started now, and Mr. Gates was in Moscow, and Condoleezza Rice is in Moscow right now. I'm very happy about this dialogue right now, and we start getting answers. But according to our experts, if we should protect ourselves against a theoretical, hypothetical threat from Iran or any other country in that region, the tactical, not strategic, but tactical missile system, maybe a common anti-missile system, NATO-Russia tactical anti-missile system, will be definitely enough. And we are ready to develop such a system. But to have a strategic anti-missile system is meant for something else, and we just express our concern about that. The current Russia policy towards our neighbors. You know, when the Soviet Union disappeared, we still considered in very many years, and maybe still consider, people in different countries as something common. And we do understand that the quality of goods like wine, like mineral water, is as poor as the quality in these countries, as the quality of goods in Russia, produced in Russia. We are of the same origin, we have the same problems. And in very many years, the level of, so to say, the level of acceptance, of tolerance towards that poor quality of goods was extremely low. Yes, we accepted that because we are neighbors, we are friends, and we can consume bad but very cheap Moldovan wine. I do not know whether you have tasted it any time. It is very, very bad, I may tell you, quite frankly. And as far as Georgian wine is concerned, it is much better. But we have statistics, just statistics, telling us that they raise export of Georgian wine to Russia 10 times, in 10 times higher tempo than the tempo of production of grapes in Georgia. It does not fit, so to say. It cannot be they produce something else, but not this good quality Georgian wine. Now, we are in a situation when we have bad relations for different reasons, but we have bad relations with some countries, which all the time blame Russia for their internal problems, like in the case of Georgia. It changes the situation, and we are not ready to accept that bad quality of products coming from these countries. So we introduce the same standards which are being used in most cases by the United States, by the European Union. We do not introduce any higher requirements or standards. We just introduce the same standards which did not exist during the last 15 years. And this is not our choice. We were ready to continue to close our eyes on some problems in these countries, and we are forced in a different position right now. Same goes for oil and gas prices. On the opposite to what you are saying, during the last 15 years, we were practicing this politicized approach, holding these prices as low and as possible in order to keep these countries in the area of Russian influence. That was the case during the last 15 years. And what is happening now is completely of the opposite character. We introduce market prices, and it's just the end of the story, so to say, because now on we will have the same quality of trade and economic relations with these countries as we have with, for example, the European Union countries. So, yes, we have changed this attitude, but I do believe that the main substance of that new attitude is to practice an economic approach, not a political approach in our relations with these countries. Otherwise, of course, we want to have as good relations as possible with them. And if the United States proclaims its natural interests in the post-Soviet area, you cannot deny that Russia also may have some natural interests in this region. And these natural interests are much more natural than the United States' natural interests in this area.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions. Ludmilla Foster, this gentleman up here, and I'll save myself the last question.
Is this on? Is this turned on? Ludmilla Foster, Congress of Russian Americans. First of all, I would like to commend you on your excellent, superb English.
Thank you.
That is very important here. Oh, I have a very simple question about the stability with the presidential elections. There is so much being said here in Western media that President Putin is selecting or appointing his successor, and how terribly authoritarian it is, and that he really has turned out into a Tsar, into a... 2 months later, Prime Minister Blair announces his retirement, and he says, for the sake of stability in England, I am going to have as my successor Lord Brown. And everybody says, oh, how wonderful. I mean, Western press says this, how wonderful, there is going to be stability in succession in English. How do your committee members view this as a prejudice towards, against Russia and Russian politics, who are considered to be whatever, primitive?
And the gentleman right down here.
Yeah, my question is in the same vein. I'm Paul, I'm with the EIR, and in the Congress I find that many of the Democrats are taking a very right-wing approach towards Russia, talking about Putin, and I think that they're ignoring his overture to work with the United States with FDR's policy in mind. Also, I think the Democratic leadership is ignoring Russia's proposals to build things like the Bering Strait a tunnel to connect both continents now. Speaking at a conference in Moscow just a couple weeks ago, my boss, Mr. LaRouche, and a former governor from Alaska were very much in support of the policy, but we're having trouble, I guess, getting this message across to our friends in Congress. So I wonder if you could, send a clear message to them for me.
Answering the first question, Russia is in a very difficult situation right now because anti-Russian spirits are rather fashionable. You will never make a mistake if you are as anti-Russian as possible, as a politician, I mean. And there is something what I call presumption of guilty for Russia. Any situation which happens in Russia is always interpreted as badly for Russia as possible, so to say. And when Anna Politkovskaya is killed, which is a big tragedy for us Russians, nobody doubts that, of course, authorities did it. And when Alexander Litvinenko is killed, murdered in London, of course it is KGB or FSB or special services who did it. And the recent State Department report on human rights in the world, including Russia, in the part of Russia, starts with the main event which happened in the field of human rights in Russia was the murder of a reform-minded vice president of the Central Bank of Russia. It's completely stupid. Once again, this is another tragedy, another crime, but it does not have anything to do with democracy and human rights, and to try to take it by force to the discussion about human rights, adding this reform-minded, I just feel so sorry about such comments, which they're on the surface. And same goes for this discussion about Russian political system, Russian democracy, and the coming presidential election. In many countries, the president of the country is elected by the parliament, not the people. At least in this situation, we are more democratic than Estonia, for example. They tried to elect one person as a president. They failed because they did not have majority for that. And then they found another one, and then they found the third one, and the third one is Mr. Ilves from the United States, and he's now elected president of Estonia. Nobody asks about his legitimacy and credibility. I do not find it more democratic than the system we have in Russia, with all its problems and handicaps. So yes, I do believe that Russia is being treated in a rather unfair way. We are ready to accept critics in cases when these critics are justified, and we are ready to accept help and assistance in solving our internal problems when problems are real and critics are justified. But when this threshold is exceeded, people in Russia stop listening. Just stop listening. In this State Department report, very many things were fair and proper about Russia. But as soon as people read about the murder of a reform-minded deputy banker as a confirmation of problems in the field of human rights in Russia, people stopped reading such documents, unfortunately. So this, you have to know the feeling of measure, so to say. Alaska case. Yes, I understand how important it is. It is really important for us in the sense of developing our Far East, Northeast regions, and I definitely believe that it should be a very important item in our bilateral relations. Frankly speaking, I have not felt yet any big differences in approaches of Republicans and Democrats in this case, but I will look at it more attentively, and in case I will discover these differences, I will let them know that we are unhappy about that.
Okay. I have a final question as I sit here and take notes and listen to your presentation. I'm left with a kind of strange impression of what Russia is and is about. It's a country without any real external interests. It's a country which, despite its scale and accomplishments, is often subject to a presumption of guilt. It's a country without a national spirit. It's a country in which people have difficulty finding something to be proud of, despite the fact that, as George Kennan used to point out, Russia has made great contributions to the understanding of the human condition. And Russia's contributions to understanding life on this planet are enormous, so there's a great deal that one can be proud of. So what is the nature of this misfit between the Russian Federation and this larger Russia, which has made so many contributions to the world we live in? Why isn't there more pride? Why doesn't Russia have external interests? You describe a picture in which there seems to be a missing part of the puzzle. And what would you do if you could do anything as a politician to begin to shape that missing piece?
Thank you very much for this final question. I was trying to be as sincere as possible and not to deliver a propaganda speech about Russia. I was trying to explain for you how Russians feel about it. And for most of Russians, what happened 15 years ago is still a big tragedy. We were all educated in completely different ways. I remember my own childhood. I could wake up in the middle of the night, being, I do not know, 7 years old, during the Soviet time, and suddenly feeling I was so happy and so proud about being born in the largest and strongest country in the world. I could just imagine how come I am so happy I'm born in the Soviet Union, not somewhere in Nigeria or anywhere else. And suddenly it all disappeared. It all disappeared without giving us back anything compensating that disappearance. We were educated. We were the winners in the Second World War. We were the liberators. We brought freedom and prosperity to at least one part of Europe. Suddenly it turned all to be wrong, to be false, and the truth of the history is completely different. And our economy is still uncompetitive. We have very many problems in our neighboring countries, which suddenly, after centuries of being together and solving very successfully their own problems, like Georgia, for example, who joined Russia by its own decision. The history is that Russia did not want to take Georgia inside, so to say. And suddenly the same Georgia, Mr. Saakashvili establishes a museum of occupation of Georgia by the Soviet Union. I may accept it to some extent in case of the Baltic states, but Georgia is completely different, and suddenly it comes back to Russians. So we have to defend ourselves all the time, which I don't like, definitely. So Russia is in a transition period right now, and we need to find our own answers to very many questions which suddenly appeared, who we are and what we should be proud of. And we need time for that. We need better understanding for that. We need patience from your side. And as long as this presumption of guilt exists, as long as we have to... I watch CNN the next morning after Alexander Litvinenko died in London. They have this 10 minutes news. 8 minutes out of it goes for Alexander Litvinenko, and we have some guy from the British intelligence service thinking loudly about why Russia could have done it. And then we have 2 last minutes about 225 people being killed in Iraq the same morning by an explosion. I cannot understand it, and I feel that people try to, by such companies, people try to keep Russia on this defense mode, as long as possible, and this is a wrong approach because it makes us more aggressive, frankly speaking. We start to be more isolationistic.
Isolationist.
Isolationist, yes, isolationist in our approaches. And